Oh, come on, you can do better than that. There you go. 11:30 crowd. Everybody's awake. Love that. Hey, we're so glad you're here. We're continuing our Swagger Wagon series that we began a few weeks ago. We've been using the Swagger Wagon as a metaphor for the family because life happens in the Swagger Wagon. And we have so much to teach and to train our kids in. And we've been enjoying this series talking about positive parenting over the last few weeks. And so I want to wrap this series up today, put a bow on it by talking about how we can talk to kids about sex, a powerful topic from the Proverbs. But before we get into all that, I wanted to give you guys some really good news. I have a little something here. You guys know what that is? That's right. On Friday, we were able to get the amended contract signed on our new building, and we're going to be moving in just a short period of time. We are so fired up, so pumped about that. And it's just happened on Friday. So next weekend, next Sunday, we're going to be announcing a lot more information about times, dates, places, all that kind of stuff. So you just don't want to miss next Sunday. It's going to be a really, really fulfilling, rewarding experience just to see what God has done, God's provision for our church. This is the mother of all church buildings. I'm talking 42,000 square feet. It is an amazing facility. God has been so good and so faithful to bless us with this. And we've got some more rocks to move around out there. Some of you know we moved 100 tons of rock a couple weekends ago. And Jason, I hope you're ready, buddy, because we've got about 25 tons more we need to get moved. And we need to do some cleaning and some preparation. The painters, the floor people, all that, they're going to be working on all kinds of stuff. We're going to be doing all kinds of things. But it's going to be cool. It's going to be exciting. And we're going to tell you more about that next Sunday. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Swagger Wagon. I'm excited to talk about this because this could be one of the most difficult topics to talk to kids about. In fact, I formed a little focus group this week, and we just kind of shared, we kind of swapped war stories, so to speak, about how our parents gave us the talk, And one person in the focus group shared that their parents used fruits and vegetables to try to explain the birds and the bees, kind of thing. Don't think about that too much, but it was a little awkward, a little uncomfortable for this individual. And somebody else learned about the facts of life from her mom, who came in and turned off her TV. She was watching her favorite movie. How dare her mom do that? And her mom said, "We need to talk." And she had a very serious, somber look on her face. And she thought she was in trouble. And the mom busted out a bag. And in that bag, she had feminine products. She had a Hallmark card that said, "You're becoming a woman." She had a pencil, a keychain, and a ring. Now, how's that for the hookup, right? She said it was the most awkward conversation she had ever had with her mom. Her mom's lip was quivering like this, and her voice began to crack, and she was so nervous and sweaty, and she still kind of gives her mom a hard time about that. Pretty funny, isn't it? My friend, when I was in the 6th grade, I went over to his house one day. His dad didn't want to have the talk with him, so he gave him the Time Life books. How's that for an easy out, right? Son, read the encyclopedia. And he had, bookmarked certain pages in the Time Life books. And so he had all the charts out, and he was like, "Hey, Ryan, you ever saw one of those before?" And so I've never been the same after having that Time Life book experience. Wow. Talking to kids about sex can be very difficult, but it is very necessary, isn't it? It's very necessary. And we're going to look at Proverbs chapter 5 this morning because Proverbs chapter 5 to chapter 7 is the greatest text in the Bible that I know of about how to talk to kids about sex. I love this chapter, and by the way, I love the book of Proverbs because it is simple, it is wise. The book of Proverbs is wisdom. Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, was the writer. And so many books of the Bible are more difficult to understand. They're more kind of intellectual and challenging and can give you a brain ache, to some degree. And we need that, and there's a place for that. But sometimes we just need some practical, A plus B equals C kind of teaching and talking, right? That's the book of Proverbs. Now, the book of Proverbs covers a myriad of topics: friendship, marriage, finances, health, tons and tons of other things. But the number one subject that Solomon gave his attention to, the biggest chunk of Proverbs, goes to teaching parents how to talk to kids about sex. Chapters 5 to chapter 7 is a huge chunk of the book of Proverbs, and it's all about it. So God has a great word for us today. We need to download these truths, and I want to encourage you just to take out your notes, and you can follow along with where we're going today. Some parents today are asking, well, can I teach my kids about sexuality when we look at our own lives and we say, well, you know, I've had some inconsistencies. I'm not sure that I've really batted 1,000 when it comes to the topic, and so therefore I don't really want to talk to my kids about that because I see some of the things that I've done in my own life. Well, let me ask you a question. Have you ever lied before? Somebody hold up their hand. All right, anybody here ever told a lie? Okay, yeah, there you go. Good job. Are you going to teach your kids to not lie? Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, I hope you do. People are like, let me think about that. No, it's not a trick question. Let me ask this. Have you ever gotten a speeding ticket? Okay, anybody? I've got several of those. Yeah, oh yeah. Somebody said amen. I heard it in the back. Yeah, speeding tickets. Are you going to teach your kids to not speed? Absolutely, you should. So in order to teach our kids doesn't mean that we have to have always done everything perfectly. That's a total misnomer. Don't believe that. Sometimes you may teach your kids to do the opposite of what you did because you saw the hurt and the pain and the difficulties that it caused you, and you don't want your kids to go through some of the same struggles that you went through. So let's don't use that as an excuse to not teach kids about sex, because kids are learning about sex everywhere. I'm talking magazines, internet, movies, TV, friends at school, A to Z, it's everywhere. If we don't talk about it in the home, oh my goodness. The message is going to be convoluted. It's going to be all combobulated and mixed up, and to bring clarity. And Solomon took it upon himself to teach his sons. In the whole context of Proverbs chapter 5 to 7, Solomon is talking to his sons, and he's writing this powerful section on this topic. Now, the first thing that we see beginning in Proverbs chapter 5 is that parents should take responsibility for their kids. Parents should take responsibility. This is part of being a responsible parent. And you notice verse 1, it says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom and listen carefully to my counsel, and then you will learn to be discreet and to store up knowledge." And you notice 3 times in that text he says, my. In other words, these are my kids. Those kids are your kids. We have a responsibility. We've got to own it, that is a responsibility that belongs to the parents, not just to the school system, not to the church, not to the friends, not to whatever else. But I'm going to take responsibility for my kids. And so Solomon writes to his sons, and he imparts to them wisdom about sexual integrity. And we should learn from this and say, I want to take responsibility for my kids. You know, I want to do everything I can to help my kids make good choices. And as they get older, God's going to use me to help direct them and lead them and encourage them and help them and all those things. We got to own it. We got to take that responsibility. And we should teach our kids the pros and the cons. And Solomon's going to do this. He's going to talk about the dangerous and the dark side, but he's also going to come back and he's going to talk about how sex can be so wonderful and such a blessing and so good as well. And we need to teach our kids accordingly. Now, sometimes we don't teach our kids because of naivety. Sometimes we think, well, my kids live in a bubble. This is not really an issue, and so I don't need to talk about it. Sometimes we think it's other people's responsibility. We'll let them show a video at school and my kids are good. Other times we think that it's kind of embarrassing, or we look at our own lives and we're like, well, nobody really talked to me, so I guess, my kids will be okay if I don't talk to them. And then finally, sometimes we just don't want to feel hypocritical, and we already talked about that, but those are some common excuses for not talking to kids about sex. All of those are wrong. We need to own it. We need to be responsible. My son, pay attention to my wisdom and listen carefully to my counsel. And that ought to be the heart cry of every parent, is to help our kids. And the question is, well, when do we start talking to kids about sex and about some of these topics? The reality is we probably need to have an ongoing conversation, right? It's not like this box that you check off and you're like, oh man, they're this many years old and we got that behind us. We're never going to talk about it again. Really what we need to be doing is we need to have kind of that initial talk, but we need to have ongoing conversations. And as kids get older, it's more appropriate to talk about more things. And when they're smaller, it's appropriate to talk about less things. So it's this ongoing conversation that we're having as we're responsible, but probably around puberty is a time that many experts think that kids need to be learning and discussing about some of the changes that they're going to be going through physiologically and what some of those things may mean. And so it's a natural time to begin to have those conversations with kids. So we should look for those impromptu moments. Sometimes your kid hears something at school and they come home and they want to know, what does this mean? And so sometimes it's unexpected. It's like, whoa, okay, here we go. But we're ready for that. And other times it may be a little more planned, and we may be a little bit, more thought out and maybe a little more prepared. But nonetheless, we should do that, and we should always give our kids the freedom to call us if they're in a bad situation or if they have an issue. Open discussion in the home is good. Open discussion is good. We don't want to make our kids nervous to talk about it because our lip quivers and our voice cracks and we get, upset and sweaty every time that it comes up, right? Now, that's a lot easier said than done. I get that. But we hopefully our kids can feel that sense of comfort with us. So the first thing is we take responsibility. Then the second thing, we train our kids to run from temptation. Okay, running is a good thing. It is a good thing. I'm going to have my daughter join the track team. Running is a great method for sexual integrity, isn't it? And you notice in verse 3, the Bible says, the lips of an immoral woman are sweet as honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. Woo. But the result is as bitter as poison, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave, for she does not care about the path to life. She staggers down the crooked trail and doesn't even realize where it leads. So now, my sons, listen to me. Never stray from what I'm about to say. Run from her. Don't go near the door of her house. Solomon begins by telling his sons, listen, if you're going to keep your sexual integrity intact, you need to practice running. When a woman begins to say certain things to you, begins to kind of smooth talk you, begins to manipulate you, you need to beware, you need to be wise, you need to be cautious. By the way, guys can do this too. And we got to teach our daughters to be careful about guys that will say whatever that our daughters want to hear to get certain things from them. And we ought to train them to discern and to run. And you notice the contrast here in the passage between smoother than oil and sharp as poison and as a double-edged sword. I mean, it's amazing how manipulative that our words can be. And we need to be wary of the kind of people that we let our kids date. Now, I know some of our teenagers may be in here this morning, and you may think, man, it's not cool to have my mom and dad, giving me insight and wisdom. And listen, your parents may be old school. That may be the case. But listen, God will also give your parents wisdom in how to direct you. So don't dismiss it. They may have something that you're not seeing. And if you're a teenager, you ought to get the counsel of your parents about the people that you date because they've done a lot more life and they know a lot more about you and they know probably a lot more about the Bible than you do. So don't miss that. But we ought to be careful. Here's a question that every parent ought to teach their kid to ask when they start to date somebody. Are they a Christian? Right? Are they a Christian? That sounds kind of simple, but it is just the truth. Now, if you have a biblical set of values and you're dating somebody that does not have a biblical set of values, then what's going to happen? Well, either you're going to end up over there or they're going to end up over there, but most of the time, the Christian gets sucked in over here. That's why Solomon says to his sons, run, get out of there. Don't entertain the thought. Don't go down that path. Don't give in to something like that. How do they dress? That's a big thing right there. Woo! How do they dress? Modesty. We need to teach our girls to dress modestly. don't let your kids dress like Pastor Brandon. He wears those deep V-necks that come down to the navel region. You know what I'm saying? That is not, do not do that. Modesty. How do you dress? How do you look? Are they a smooth talker? They use flattery. And that's what Solomon's saying here most specifically. So we got to teach our kids to run. When a situation like that comes up, we run. We flee sexual sin. Joseph is the greatest example of that in the Bible. He was trying to avoid being seduced, but he was being seduced by Potiphar's wife, and what did he do? Joseph ran away. He ran away so fast he left his cloak, right? That's some pretty fast running, isn't it? Joseph knew, man, if I hang around there, it's not going to be good. And we ought to teach our kids to do that. So we ought to flee sexual sin. Now here's the third thing. Talk to kids about consequences of sexual sin. It is one thing to tell kids, don't do this. But it is another thing to say, don't do this, and here's why. And Solomon, in a very wise fashion, he lays out a beautiful case for maintaining sexual integrity. Look at these things. We could probably deduce 5 or 6 things. I want to mention 3 of the list here in verses 9 to 14. If you do, you will lose your honor and hand over to merciless people everything that you have achieved in life. Strangers will obtain your wealth, and someone else will enjoy the fruit of your labor. And afterward you will groan in anguish when disease consumes you. And you will say, how I hated discipline. If only I had not demanded my own way. Oh, why didn't I listen to my teachers? Why didn't I pay attention to those who gave me instruction? I have come to the brink of utter ruin, and now I must face public disgrace. So let's give kids the reasons. Here's the first reason. This is so practical, it just sounds almost silly, but it is totally true. The first reason, keep your wealth. Verse 10, strangers will obtain your wealth, and somebody else will enjoy the fruit of your labor. Somebody says, what does money have to do with sex? It can have a lot to do with it. Listen, if you have a child with somebody that you're not married to, and you got custody issues and lawyers involved, and it's going to cost you a ton of money. There's a financial side of this. Biblical commentators believe that this may be talking about extortion. You know, if you're married to somebody and you got a girlfriend on the side, there may be some extortion going on. You expose yourself, not just morally, but practically speaking, there's a financial side of it. Again, Proverbs says some things that are so practical and so good to think about today. There is a huge financial issue. Notice he says, everybody else is going to have your stuff in verses 10 and 11. So there's a financial thing. And there's also a health thing. Look at verse 11. Afterward, you will groan in anguish when disease consumes your body. You know, in the 1960s, doctors tell us there were 2 main venereal diseases, and both of them could be knocked out with a penicillin shot. It was no big deal. Today, in the 21st century, there's more than 40. And many of those 40 have different strands. Huge problems. Huge problems. And condoms don't work 100% of the time. So that's not a good alternative. What God has said is what we ought to do. God has said one man, one woman in the context of marriage. That ought to be the standard. That ought to be what we teach our kids. When that begins to happen, then these other problems just seem to dissipate and to go away. You know, the human papillomavirus is the leading cause of cervical cancer in the world, and more women die annually from cervical cancer than they do of HIV and AIDS. 90% of cases of cervical cancer come from this STD. There's no remedy for it. And many people don't even realize that they have it. And 5.5 million people are infected annually. It's a huge deal. It's a huge deal. A lot of times we don't want to talk about this kind of stuff. It's kind of uncomfortable for obvious reasons. But when you begin to paint the picture of why maintaining God's standards are important, it really begins to make a lot of sense, doesn't it? This is why God has said from the beginning of time that we ought to have one man and one woman in the context of marriage. If that happens, all these things begin to go away. And then finally, he talks about your reputation, your honor. Verse 14, I have come to the brink of utter ruin, and now I must face public disgrace. You want to be embarrassed? You want people to disrespect you? Become a person that doesn't have integrity in this area of your life. We see this all the time, all the time. Arnold Schwarzenegger, just the governor of California a few years ago, he had a child with the lady that kept his house, and it kind of came out when she was like 13 years old. His wife left him. He lost his honor. Whenever you think about Arnold Schwarzenegger, yeah, you think about somebody blowing stuff up, but you also think about this other thing too. He lost his honor. More recently, we've seen this politician, Anthony Weiner. He stepped down from the Congress in 2011, the New York congressman, because he was sexting. He was sending pictures of himself to hot babes on Twitter, And it all kind of came out, and he resigned. I don't know if you guys remember this. Well, a few months ago, he announced he was going to now run for mayor of New York. And the news was covering this. They were going crazy on this. All they would talk about with Anthony Weiner was how he was sexting and sending pictures of himself. It didn't matter if he was a good politician or not. It didn't matter what he had done for the people of New York or not. All that people want to talk about was his integrity and his honor. And unfortunately, when we begin to color outside the lines of what God has said to us, we put ourselves in a position to lose our honor, to lose our reputation, to lose our influence, to lose our focus, and so many people make this mistake. We need to teach our kids to not make the same mistakes that so many other people have made and that do make. People think a lot of times, well, sex is private, right? But you know what? When we begin to use it outside of God's boundaries, what begins private oftentimes becomes public. And so we need to teach our kids. Let's be honest about it, right? Let's say what it is to our kids. Let's prepare them to have integrity. And there's also spiritual implications to sexual sin, and Solomon doesn't get into that in detail in Proverbs chapter 5, but certainly when we sin against God, it divides our relationship with him, and that's a whole nother message for another time. But all that to say, let's tell our kids the problems, the reasons why we should avoid it, and then let's talk about the good things about sexuality. Let's talk about a good, healthy marriage, because he goes into this next section, and what does he do? Look at verse 15. Drink water from your own well. In other words, we ought to teach kids to thrive in marriage. How do kids thrive in marriage? They drink from their own well. Share your love only with your wife. Why spill the water of your springs in public, having sex with just anyone? You should reserve it for yourselves. Don't share it with strangers. Let your wife be the fountain of blessing. In other words, don't be promiscuous for you. Rejoice in the wife of your youth. She is a loving doe, a graceful deer. Let her breast satisfy you always. It's getting hot in here. May you always be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, with an immoral woman, or embrace the breasts of an adulterous woman? For the Lord sees clearly what a man does, examining every path he takes, and an evil man is held captive by his own sins. They are ropes to catch and hold him. He will die for lack of self-control, and he will be lost because of his incredible folly. So here he's using this metaphor, drink from your own cistern, drink from your own well. In the ancient world, fresh water was a great rarity. It was a great delight. Today we drink fresh water. We don't think that much about it, but it's refreshing. If you've been out jogging or exercising and you're just like, man, I just need something to drink, most of the time you want to drink some water. It's refreshing to you. And so Solomon's telling his sons, sexuality in the marriage relationship is refreshing. It's enjoyable. It is pleasurable. It is good. It is healthy. Look forward to that. Don't settle for drinking water out of the gutter. The water runs off the street, runs down into some type of sewage. Don't drink that kind of water. Drink the fountain. Drink the cistern. Drink the good stuff. Don't settle for this toxic stuff. Drink the good stuff. And then in verse 16 he says, should your springs overflow into the streets, your streams of water in the public squares. In other words, don't don't eat don't drink the bad stuff. Sex inside of marriage will protect your finances, your honor, your integrity, your reputation, your health, and your conscience. And that sounds good. It sounds really good. Verse 18, he goes on and he says, may your fountain be blessed and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. In other words, enjoy your wife. And don't let somebody else drink out of your fountain, and you don't drink out of somebody else's fountain. You drink from the fountain that God gives you, and that is your wife. And he references the wife as a loving doe. In the ancient world, men would refer to their wives as graceful animals. In the Song of Solomon, it's a gazelle. Here it is a deer. You could also use the word a fox. If you called your wife a fox, that would be a compliment even in our culture today, because foxes are graceful animals. If you call your wife a goat, that's not good. Don't try that. Goats are not graceful. That's not what he's talking about here. Stay away from the goats. Be captivated by her love. That word captivated means intoxicated. It's the same word that's used to describe being drunk, being consumed. We ought to be consumed with a passion for our spouse. We ought to be captivated by it. But we live in a time where the urban legend is that if you really want to have meaningful sexuality, the way that you do it is you hang out at singles bars and at university campuses and beach clubs and you meet people and you don't even know them, and that is meaningful and powerful sexuality. That's like so good. According to a University of Chicago study, this is not conducted by a church. This is not conducted by a bunch of Christians. University of Chicago study found the exact opposite. Did you know this? Listen to this. It says that the study found that the more religious a married couple was, the more frequent and satisfying their sex life was. And it also said that religious people who were married by far and away had the best sex lives. They have the most frequent sex, the most satisfying sex, the most fun in sex, and the longest lived sex lives. Among the very top category of people that were surveyed were conservative evangelical Protestant women that said that they reported the most satisfying sex lives. In other words, people who love Jesus and follow the Bible are saying that they have more fulfillment in their sex life than people that hang out at singles bars and strip clubs and whatever else. God has been saying that for several thousand years. And when we begin to do what God says, then the blessings of God are there. The blessings of God. We want God to bless our families, don't we? We want God to bless our lives. We want God to bless our children. We want God to bless all that we do. And when it belongs to Him, then we begin to put ourselves in the position of blessing. So we ought to give our kids every reason to succeed and every reason to experience a fulfilling marriage. They will be healthier. They'll have more money. They'll have a good reputation. And they will bring honor and glory to Jesus Christ. And that is our goal.